Romans chapter 9 marks a significant theological shift in the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, where he begins to address the issue of Israel's place in God's plan of salvation. After discussing the power of the gospel and the justification of both Jews and Gentiles through faith, Paul now turns to a sorrowful reflection on the fact that many Israelites have not accepted Christ. Paul opens the chapter with a heartfelt lament, expressing deep grief over the unbelief of his fellow Jews. He emphasizes their privileged status in salvation history. They are the people through whom God gave the law, the covenants, and ultimately, the Messiah. Yet, despite these blessings, many have rejected Christ, leading Paul to explore the nature of God's promises and election. A central theme in Romans chapter 9 is God's sovereign choice. Paul defends God's justice by pointing out that God's mercy and calling are not based on human effort or lineage, but on His own divine will. He uses Old Testament examples, such as the selection of Isaac over Ishmael and Jacob over Esau, to illustrate that God's purposes in election stand independent of human merit. Paul also addresses potential objections to divine sovereignty by affirming that God, as creator, has the right to shape his creation according to his will. He uses the metaphor of a potter and clay to reinforce the idea that God's decisions are ultimately beyond human challenge. Finally, Paul explains that the inclusion of the Gentiles and the partial hardening of Israel were foretold by the prophets and serve God's broader redemptive plan. He concludes by showing that Gentiles attained righteousness by faith, while many Jews stumbled because they sought it through the law. In summary, Romans chapter 9 is a profound reflection on God's sovereign grace, the mystery of divine election, and the unfolding of His plan of salvation. It calls readers to humility and awe before God's wisdom and mercy.